author discussion will be archived as part of the Conifer Historical Society's collection, which means it will be available for public access upon request. In addition, parts of the discussion, video, audio, screenshot, or transcripts may be used as newsletter content, social media content, or for marketing purposes. By participant today, you accept the potential future use of your name, voice, video likeness, and comments. Thanks for your participation. Is everybody okay with that?
Sure.
Great. So since I wasn't planning on leading this, I kind of have a list of questions. So let's see if I can find those. All right. I think, Bonnie, we'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself and give us a little background and whatever you want to tell us about writing the book, and then we can start doing some questions with you if that's okay.
Okay. I had sent you some discussion questions, and then I think from your meeting 2 weeks ago, you had some questions for me. And so I have prepared some answers to those questions. And I think, first of all, I would like to know who is in our group today. I see a Miss Bonnie, and there aren't many Bonnies around, so I'm wondering.
I'm Bonnie Yockstick. Bonnie Jean. What Bonnie are you?
Elizabeth.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. I live in Arvada, but I'm real interested in Colorado history. So that's
what's your last name?
Yockstick. It's Y-O-C-K-S-T-I-C-K. It's Dutch and German.
Huh. Okay.
Well, my husband. Okay.
Yes. Right. Okay.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Deborah, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm anxious to meet her. You have to unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. Yes, I know Bonnie very well. We work together a lot with Staunton. So, and I met most of you last week. I was here, or 2 weeks ago.
Great. Candace, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Candace Valentine. I'm actually already know Bonnie from a book group we were in together and live nearby at Schaefer's Crossing. And I'm going to turn my screen off and mute myself because I'm going to change rooms and I don't want to make you all motion sick. But I'm still listening.
Thank you for that consideration. And everybody probably knows Susan, but Susan, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, yes, thank you. My name is Susan Swartzer. I'm a volunteer with the Conifer Historical Society and a resident of Conifer. So glad you all are here with us today. I've had the opportunity to have a few exchanges with Bonnie, of course, over the years, and her great work, and historically Jeffco and her husband's great work too, and all the work they do for Staunton in the area. So I just think it's such an honor to have you here today, Bonnie. I'm so excited. Both Bonnies.
Yeah,
and Candace. So thank you so much, Michelle, for stepping in for Maggie and facilitating this, and for Bonnie for just coming to join us. Such a treat to have a local author and for our inaugural official book club. Yay.
Right. Well, I'm really thrilled that you chose my book to be your first selection. So that's really cool. And thank you very much. So my name's Bonnie Scudder. I'm a 5th generation Coloradan, but I wasn't born here. But my mother and her parents were born here, and my mother's parents and grandparents and great grandparents all lived here, and maybe even back one more generation, I'm not really sure. But my earliest direct ancestor came out here in 1861. And so Colorado history has always been very special to me because of my ancestors' involvement in making some of that history. And so I was living up at Schaefer's Crossing, and our property touches on the park in one point. And was I was a teacher. I taught in Denver and I taught in Jeffco, and I was also an administrator in Denver. And I was retired at this point, and I had heard that there was a position up at the park, and Jen Martin was looking for somebody to serve as a volunteer resource or a volunteer historian and archivist for the park. And so I decided to apply for the job because I was interested in it and I wanted to know what was going on in the park, which was right next door to me. And so when I was interviewed, I talked her into hiring more than one volunteer because it wouldn't cost her anymore. And she wanted to get a college student who was getting a master's degree in historic preservation. So she hired Beth, who was fit that category. And then I was also selected. And so we worked together real closely to obtain designation, historic landmark designation on the Staunton Ranch buildings. And so that was back almost, I think it was March when I first met Jen and started working in May of 2011. So it was about 10 years ago when this started. And so our job as research archive or historian archivists was to secure the ranch, the landmark designation. So we were to research the history of the Staunton family, the Staunton Ranch, the other ranches which were a part of Staunton, would be a part of Staunton State Park and the surrounding area. And so we started doing that. And one of our biggest sources of information, I mean, we conducted local interviews of local people. We made sure that we had, or I checked out all of the local history books and already had purchased some of them and read up on those to see if there was anything about the Staunton Ranch or the Elk Falls Ranch or the Davis Ranch or the Staunton family, and found a little bit, but not very much. And we checked the internet and found practically nothing there. We did find some information through the Jefferson County place names database, which isn't online right now, but it will be at some point, I think. And so on. The History Colorado turned out to be our biggest source of information. There was a Staunton collection there, and it consisted of 12 boxes of archive materials, or let's see, I guess they called them, I guess they were archive of manuscripts, that's right. And a lot of that were letters that were in boxes. So they were boxes about, let's see, about this big, this big. And some of them were organized and a lot of them weren't. They were just put in there and nobody had time to go through them. But we spent a lot of time over the next 4 months going through that collection and learning a lot, and gathered enough information so that we were successful in gaining that landmark designation on the 4th of December in 2012. So this was good. I didn't initially set out to write a book. You know, my job was to research and to provide information so that we could get the designation. And the book just totally evolved, and it was a very, very interesting journey. One of the first people that I met was Hank Aldifer, and I'm sure Conifer knows about Hank. I don't know how many of you have met him personally. I know that Deborah has. And Hank was a wonderful source of information. And he kind of guided me through a lot of the steps. And Hank also had known Frances Staunton because as a 15-year-old, he had worked, he had helped her somehow at the ranch. And so he had met Frances several times. And so he was a tremendous resource of information. And I took Hank down to History Colorado several times with me because he was really interested in going through the archives. And so we had a lot of fun doing that. And it was great getting to know him. So one of the real benefits of this whole thing was getting to meet and getting acquainted with a lot of people in the community that I hadn't been acquainted with because I had been teaching. I'd been working full time down the hill. So I'm talking about my experiences as an author, and do you want me to go ahead and continue with that? And I don't know how long you have put aside for this meeting.
Susan, do you know what the answer is to that? I wasn't sure if it was scheduled for an hour or an hour and a half.
I believe we're scheduled for an hour, but we'll see how the conversation flows as well. People can
Okay.
opt in or
Okay.
out of more time, including yourself, Bonnie.
Okay. Well, and so at this point, I would ask if anybody has any questions. I will say one more thing about the time that I went with Beth, who was the other person, the other volunteer, and then Jen accompanied me one time, and then Hank accompanied me several times. So 2 of us went 2 times a week for about 4 months to this down to investigate the Staunton collection. I was allowed to take pictures of anything that wasn't a photograph. And I took lots and lots and lots of pictures. And that was very helpful. And so I would come home and we would download them onto the computer, and then I would print them out. I spent a fortune at Staples on paper and ink. With these papers, then I could put them into notebooks under this category, and then I could put them over into this category, because often the things that we were finding really were appropriate in 2 or 3 different areas. So I reused that information over and over again. So I photographed a lot of documents, then I printed them out and organized them into notebooks and reorganized them as I needed to. Before I got started on this project, I really didn't know much of anything about historic preservation. I was a retired public school teacher and administrator. I had lived in Pine for 15 years and was very interested in the area and interested in the local history. I was an experienced educational researcher and had had a lot of experience writing reports. And some of my work had been published, but I hadn't had any experience in self-publishing, and that's the route that I chose to take when my book evolved. So we learned, with Beth and with Jen, we learned as much as we could about the topic, and we did get the landmark application. We got the landmark status, and so that was great. As an educator, I had spent a lot of time writing curriculum, and we would spend the summer writing these projects, and they would look at, our bosses would look at them and say, that's nice. And it seemed like most of the time this stuff was read by 3 or 4 people, and then it was put on the shelf. And we had spent so much time researching the Staunton family and the area and the ranch, and we had found so many interesting things. And I knew that our community really enjoyed local history. I had read Margaret Bentley's book that was given to us as a gift when we first bought our property on Elk Creek Road. The former owners gave that to us. And okay, now I'm getting cookies on my screen. That's annoying. But I knew that local history books were treasured in the Conifer area, and I thought that this interesting information needed to be shared. The park would be open someday, and there would be visitors coming, and they would be interested in the history. And so I did, decided to go ahead and proceed with writing the book. Through the interviews, as I mentioned before, I met some really wonderful people. Hank Aldifer was a person who I learned so much from. It was really very helpful. Going through the Staunton collection each day, it was like a treasure hunt. I mean, particularly when Hank and I were up there, we would say, hey, look, I found this. What do you think of this? And it was really very, very interesting. Researching this was never a chore. It was always interesting and exciting and fun. And writing the book ended up being exactly the same way. I think a lot of writers say, well, I'm going to get up at 5 in the morning and I'm going to write in the morning and write until noon, and then I'm going to do something else. I wasn't that way. You know, I just wrote what I wanted to, and I always enjoyed it. And I would think, well, let's see, what do I want to learn about today? Or what do I want to write about today? There were so many different things that I could write about. I could write about the family. I could write about the ranch. I was learning about the Elk Falls Ranch. I was learning about the Davis Ranch and all of these different areas. And it was always really a lot of fun. So I met some really interesting people through the interviews. One thing would lead to another, as Deborah well knows, through our research together. And it was really fun. I really loved it. And the more I wrote, I felt the more I learned about writing, and the better my writing got. And my advice to emerging authors is to enjoy yourselves. Make it be fun. You know, you're doing this for other people, but you're doing it for yourself too, for the joy that you get out of learning and creating something. When I'm going to talk about one more thing here, and then I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions about that. But when I was finishing the book, I selected several people as editors. And my concern wasn't so much about the grammar and the punctuation, because I'm pretty good at that. I was a teacher for a long time at lots of different levels. But my concern was to make sure I'd gotten the content right, because I had heard some comments about some other books that had been written about, that there were inaccuracies. And while I knew that it would never be perfect, and your book will never be perfect, no matter how hard you try, there will always be something that needs tweaking. And I lost my train of thought there. I wanted it to be accurately portrayed, and Carol and Juliana Phelps were involved in this, and maybe they had something else they had to do tonight, this afternoon. But Bob Phelps had grown up in Elk Falls Ranch. He had spent a lot of time during the summers up there as a child. And so I was told to contact Bob, and Bob and Carol became my main sources for accuracy for Elk Falls Ranch. And so they were some of my quote editors for that particular section of the book. Deborah also was one of my editors, and we met after or became acquainted after the book was published. But then she, because of her deep interest in history and her knowledge of so many different things, we became sort of partners, and have done a lot of research and a lot of writing for the park, for Historically Jeffco, and so on. So like I said, I met some great people through this process. It was really great. So does anybody have any questions about that? When continuing to answer your questions, I'll talk about my research process. And then you had a question about Frances and about strong female figures. So anybody have any questions or comments that they want to make right now? Michelle, do you have any?
Actually, yeah, just a couple maybe.
Yeah.
How long exactly did it take you once you decided that you were going to write the book?
Well, deciding to write the book evolved also. I started researching the book in May of 2011, and the book was printed on May 4th of 2013. So it was about 2 years. And we had so much to do in trying to find out when we started. We knew that, well, when we bought our property in 95, the people that we purchased from had said, well, there's a park up at the end, or there's a ranch up at the end of the road there that's called the Staunton Ranch. And they were a couple of doctors, and they ran a TB sanitarium, and they had it for TB patients. They were both doctors, And they had a daughter, and she was single. She never married. And so there weren't any heirs. And that was all we knew. And we tried the internet and we couldn't find anything there. And local history books really didn't have much more information. There had been an interview done, an extensive interview of Frances Staunton in around 1980 or 81 by a woman named Terry Shoresman. And Terry was, I think, a graduate student up at Fort Collins, and was interested in historic preservation, and was hired to interview people who were thinking of donating land to the state park system. And so they had lots and lots of questions. And so this was, it was recorded on a tape recorder. I guess I got it on a CD. Yeah, on a CD. And then part of it had been transcribed. And so I read what had been transcribed, and I listened to that and took notes. And through that, I began to get a feel for a lot of the information about who were the Stauntons and why did they do things. Now, one thing that was interesting is that I had heard, and as we interviewed people, we had heard from most of them that there was a TB sanitarium up there. And there was no mention of that at all in the interview with Frances. And I later was able to contact the woman who had written it. She is the director of the Fine Arts Center, I think, in Boise, Idaho. And I think she may have just retired, but I talked to her several times, and I actually did meet with her once when driving through Boise. I stopped and gave her a copy of the book. And I had asked her about if Frances had ever said anything about tuberculosis. And, you know, she had said, well, gosh, I said, this was 30 years ago. She was having a hard time remembering. But the more she thought about it, then she thought, yeah, Terry had asked Frances about that, and Frances had made her turn off the tape recorder and put her pencil down. And then she told her that, well, yeah, they had, but don't write anything about it and don't say anything about it. So that was a secret, you know, and that was one of the reasons that my book ended up being The Secrets of Elk Creek. It was always going to be something about Elk Creek, but there were so many secrets that ended up, or mysteries that kept emerging, that it ended up being The Secrets of Elk Creek. So did I answer your question? Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Deborah, do you have any comments?
Yes, you might just mention the photographs, since there were so many photographs in the collection, and the sort of the problem of dealing with those.
Right. It was real interesting. When I first got started, I was told well, first of all, the History Colorado was closed. They were closed for several years. They were moving to a new building. They were getting it ready and so on. And so anybody who was trying to research just couldn't do anything. But they decided in January of 2012 that they would open it up 3 days a week for 5 hours a day, or 6 hours. Yeah, I think it was for 5 hours a day. You could come for 3 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. You had to register in advance, and you could come in. And so Beth got us the invitation to come, and we started coming, and we went twice a week, every week, and made sure that we did that. Well, they had said, yeah, you can take as many pictures as you want, no problem there. Just don't take pictures of photographs. And so I understood that, and I followed that. It was real interesting because working with some people, you know, they seem to feel like everything in the collection is theirs and that they have to protect it. And that I guess anybody who's coming in is I don't know. Anyway, later on, I was told at the very end, I was told that I had taken too many pictures and that their policy said I could only take 100 pictures. Well, they'd given me their policy at the beginning, and I think they didn't particularly have one. And maybe that was because everything was changing, because they were opening up and it was a new situation and they hadn't gotten around to developing a policy. But nobody had, I had been there twice a week, every week, and nobody had said anything about a limit. And so all of a sudden we were not allowed to take any more pictures. But if I had not been allowed to take those pictures, then we would have lost so much in the history. And the book would never have evolved, even though I don't have that many pictures from there. But that's how we learned about who the Stauntons were. That's how we got the designation, and everything was from that information that belonged to History Colorado, because Francis Staunton had donated everything in their house in Denver to the State Historical Society, figuring that there it would be protected and so on. So, you know, that's pretty much the story on that. The pictures were difficult, but
I guess I was thinking more of the use of the photographs.
oh, okay. Well, and that's something that we're working on with the Jefferson County Historical Commission. We're working on how to establish a procedure and a policy for obtaining photographs to use in publications or in PowerPoints or whatever, you know, when they are owned by an entity like History Colorado or Denver Public Library or so on. So that's something that we're dealing with right now, and I'm not sure exactly where that's going to end up. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think that question hasn't been answered yet. Okay, well, do you want me to explain about my research process?
Yeah, and perhaps a segue between the last segment and the next segment. At our
Yes.
previous meeting, we had the opportunity to hear a story from Bob Phelps about his adventures at the top of the falls. So it may lead into telling us about accessing rich narratives. And Bonnie Scudder, or Miss Bonnie, I'm charging you to get Bob's account written down. It was to hear his account of it, but we'd also love that written story.
Well, it's in my book. I talked about that, and I didn't identify who the person was because he wasn't sure if he wanted to be identified. But then later on, he said, well, yeah, I guess it's okay. And so I allude to it in more recent printings that that is who it was, I think. And Carol loves to share that story, I know. So yeah, Bob has done a little bit of writing. I want to get him to do some more writing about the history of Elk Falls and his adventures as a child coming up here and spending the summers with his aunt. So that's really special. I mean, you know, and Bob was one of the very special people that I met through this process of interviewing people for the designation. And it turns out Bob and I are distant cousins. I knew that I had Phelps ancestors way back, and it turns out his sister's done a lot of work in genealogy, and I met her one time when I was up at their house, and she went home and she called Bob up and said, we're related. You know? And so it goes way back. We're 6th or 7th or 8th cousins, something like that. But that, you know, that was really very special. Somebody had asked about my research process, and we researched the Staunton family, the Staunton Ranch, and the surrounding areas, which included Elk Falls Ranch, Davis Ranch, and the Chase properties, because those were the properties at that point that were part of the park that was being developed that would be named Staunton State Park. As I mentioned, we searched the internet and didn't find much, found conflicting information sometimes in local history books, interviewed residents, and organized stuff in notebooks. So that's what I had. I had all these little different colored notebooks from Staples, plastic notebooks that I could put, if it related to Davis Ranch, I had a folder on Davis Ranch and one on Elk Falls Ranch, and then Staunton Ranch and the activities of Staunton Ranch and the Staunton family and just whatever, and then other areas. So my research process, I think, is, we started researching it for a specific purpose to get the historical designation. Once that was in the works, Beth was the one who was charged with writing that, and then I did a lot of editing on that and stuff like that. At that point, I had all of this information in my office, and it was time to start working on the book. And so at that point, I started making sure that I was keeping track of park hours. And so I started kind of keeping track of non-park hours so that there wouldn't be any, indication of a conflict of interest or anything like that. And so I did that. And like I said, the book literally evolved. In writing the book, I decided to go back in time. There was a companion book called the Elk Creek Chronicles that was written by David Nelson, who had been a professor of history at Red Rocks. And he also had an interest in Elk Creek. Elk Creek Chronicles, it was Schaefer's Crossing to Pine Grove. And so he started his book at Schaefer's Crossing and went south down Elk Creek to Pine Grove. I decided, therefore, to start my book at Schaefer's Crossing and go north. And so my book starts, I talk about the local history and the history of the Ute Indians and the other groups that came. And then I start at Schaefer's Crossing and talk about that area, and then gradually work our way up Elk Creek, and then go to the park. And then we go to the other ranches, and then we go around the park and we talk about Harris Park, which is a very interesting place, and that's at the end of Elk Creek. And Calfee Gulch is another very interesting place because they had the nudist colony there. And so just tried to circle the park in the end of it. One of the reasons for starting at Schaefer's Crossing is because if you were driving, say, from Denver or from Bailey to visit the park, you would have to turn at Schaefer's Crossing. That's how you would get to the park. And so, and then I wanted to say my book continues to evolve, and Deborah is a big part of that. We continue to learn more information. Deborah and I co-chair the volunteer history team at Staunton State Park. I haven't been very active this last year. Nobody has been, since everything has been virtual. But with our husbands, we developed the historical displays at the visitor center at the park. And I wanted to ask, Candace, I imagine you have been there. Susan and Michelle and Miss Bonnie, have you been to the visitor center at Staunton State Park?
I work for Colorado Parks and Wildlife currently. I'm just getting ready to retire on the 5th of March.
Oh,
but
wow.
I work down here at Chatfield, and my park manager, Scott Roush, was the one that developed the use plan for Staunton.
Yeah.
And then my assistant manager prior to, well, when Scott left, she became the manager at Staunton. And then when she left there, she came to our park and was the operations manager. So that was Jan Anderson. And then
right. Yeah.
I'm very familiar with Zach Taylor, the current manager there. Him and I talk fairly frequently.
Okay.
So I have a good background for Staunton, and I have been at their visitor center, and I was lucky enough to get in there before it was open to the public.
Right.
Yeah, and no, I have not been into the visitor center. I've been hiking, but that was pre-pandemic, and it seemed like a lot of people were taking advantage of the park. And I thought, you know what, I think I'll just walk
Yeah.
the neighborhood. So I have not
Yeah,
been there
right.
much.
Yeah. Yeah, my husband Dick, when he's up at our house up there, loves to go there, but so many times he's gone lately and there are just too many people on the trails, and he just turns around and comes back home and hikes around our property. That's and Susan, have you been up there?
Yes, I have. It's amazing. So beautiful. And I've brought guests as well. I think it's also really nice for guests that don't have the mobility to access the rest of the park. And they really enjoy, of course, there's the program for mobility assistance at Staunton, but it's also nice just to be at the visitor center and enjoy the history and the natural history as well.
Right.
I recommend the visitor center.
A friend just sent me pictures on Facebook. They were up there hiking. They're one of the many people, Bonnie. But anyway, it's beautiful. Wow. She said it's well worth the drive and the walk. So the hike.
Right. It really is a beautiful park. And Deborah and her husband and my husband and I, as we would travel around the country or wherever we would go, we would check out visitor centers and see how they had done displays. And so we got a lot of ideas, and then we're able to apply a lot of those when we were creating the displays at the visitor center. So once things open up, hopefully, if you haven't had a chance to go there, you'll be able to go there. Deborah and I didn't get to do Living History Days because it would have been inside with our historical displays, and we just couldn't do that. So we didn't, but we're certainly hoping to do it this year, aren't we? So, okay. Let's see. Oh, so what I was saying is that the book continues to evolve. We continue to find new stories and new information. And actually, I was doing a lot of book club meetings and presentations to groups. And for quite a while, at almost every presentation I made, there was somebody in the audience who knew Bertie Hurlbutt from from the Davis Ranch, or who knew Mary Coyle Chase, something about her, or who knew something about the park, or something about the Reynolds gang, or something like that. Somebody had a connection in almost all of my sessions. And that was another way that I was learning more information and leading to uncovering more of the secrets and stuff like that. So Deborah and I write for the Marmot Messenger, which is our online volunteer newsletter. And so every 2 months we write a historical feature. And in fact, we need to decide what we're writing about for May, June, because we'll be asked that pretty soon. And I'm sure Deborah has some ideas and I have some ideas. So we do that. And then sometimes those stories we end up refining a little bit and printing in Historically Jeffco magazine. And
So, Bonnie,
yeah.
if I can ask one question, as you've been, I know I have a first edition of your book. As you've done subsequent editions, have you updated with additional information that you have discovered?
What I've done, and I don't have second editions. I don't have additional editions, but this is my 5th printing. The number of pages is the same, but as I get new information, sometimes I get information that seems more accurate than something that we had before. So we go ahead and change that. Or sometimes somebody shows up and says, hey, this is the way it really happened, or something like that. And so we make those changes. The other thing is that as we get additional information, if I have space at the end of a chapter, then I can just put that in as notes or whatever. But I would have to do a new edition and go through all my picture permissions and copyright and all of that all over again if I do another edition, which I might decide to do sometime. But I, A, haven't had time to do it, and B, it really hasn't been necessary because I've been able to incorporate like the additional information that we had that is pretty strong evidence that TB was treated at the park, because Frances Staunton told her lawyer that, and her lawyer told me that. And then she also told the person who was interviewing her in 1980 that, you know, it's secondhand information, but it was from Frances to somebody else who was quite reliable. And, you know, that's all we're going to find, I think, unless at some point there's something that turns up in archaeological research at outhouses on the Staunton Ranch that proves that there were people with tuberculosis who were once there. But as far as I know, that research has not taken place yet. So, but in, okay, that's in my next question. So when it's time to reprint my book, I sometimes add information. And so this is the 5th printing. So yes, Candace, there is new information in there. So, any other questions? Okay, you had a question that Frances was an interesting woman. Does somebody want to ask me their question and what they want to know about Frances? Michelle?
You're muted.
Can't hear you.
I think that the biggest thing when we were
Michelle,
talking last
I think
week,
she's frozen.
No, she's good now.
Okay,
can you hear me?
yes.
Okay. I think one of the biggest things that we discussed last week when we were talking about the book was there seemed to be a real strong feeling amongst the group from reading your book that she was possibly gay. And then in that, we also found it really interesting, all of the strong female characters that were in the book.
Right.
So yeah, if you could kind of answer the Frances thing and your thought on that, and then we can kind of get into the strong female character piece.
Okay, and I have written out answers to those. Frances was gay. She had friends. We went, you know, the question was worded, had she sacrificed love to care for her parents? And you know, there was no indication of that at all. There, you know, she had friends of the family that were male, but she had many close female friends. One of them was Bertie Hurlbut. She also knew Mary Coyle Chase, you know, because Mary Coyle Chase had property in the latter years in 1971 on up on, you know, the Chase property, which is now part of that. And we have 2 houses that were Mary Coyle Chase's. And so they would go to tea together and stuff. But Frances did have quite a few friends. And when Archie was nearing the end of his life, he had told Frances that she needed to have somebody live with her at the ranch. He didn't want her living up at the ranch by herself, and to have one of her friends come up and stay with her when she came up. And so she carefully thought, and I think that this is all in the book, she carefully thought about who that might be and selected Alice. And so Alice came up. And I think she probably considered a lot of other people and decided that that person probably would not be a good idea. But anyway, Frances had admitted to quite a few people, I think, that she was gay. I think that this was a secret to some. I think that Archie's family probably would not have approved of that. I think that Archie probably didn't really approve of it that much. But I think that Rachel understood her daughter and cared and protected her daughter very much. As far as in writing the book, there was a bit of a dilemma that I had to deal with in terms of, okay, do I reveal this? Or should this be one of the secrets? And so I went back and forth, and some people said, well, you have to tell the truth. You have to tell it. But then I thought, okay, there were other things that I had learned from interviewing people that I thought, okay, I'm not putting that in the book. You know, I mean, just really horrifying stories about who did what and stuff like that, and that were known by some people, but there was no reason to put it in the book. And there could be descendants that might read it and stuff and be hurt by it. And so there was no reason to do that. In this case, that was not the situation, but I did talk to one person who herself was gay, and asked her, should I say this? And she said, well, are you talking about the preference of other people that you write about in the book? And I said, no. And she said, okay, then there's your answer. And I thanked her very much. You know, that was really what I felt. And so from then on, I thought, no, this is a secret. It's really nobody's business. I mean, if they want to figure that out, they can. And there was some evidence there. But when I interviewed Gasper Perricone a couple of times, he had indicated, yes, she had said that he was. And I think as far as Frances was concerned, she probably would have just as soon said it to the world, and I think that probably would have been fine with Rachel, but probably not with Archie. And so it wasn't my secret to share, I didn't think. So then the idea, one of the things, she certainly did not talk about tuberculosis, and tuberculosis was, as many of you might know, was a very feared disease. It was considered a dirty disease. It was often considered a disease that immigrants brought with them. And, there's probably a fair amount of racism and stuff involved there. But it was sort of like with AIDS, we didn't talk about that also. So it was feared, like AIDS was feared more recently in our lifetimes. So then about strong female figures. This was not really an intended theme. I guess it was a theme that evolved. And my other threads or themes also evolved. I think when I wrote the book, I was going to start at Schaefer's Crossing. I was going to tell the story. I was going to try to make it interesting. I was going to write it for people who would come to the park and who would benefit more from their experience in the park, having a better understanding of the history of the park. And so that was reason why I was writing it. The threads that ended up being a part of it that I talked about were the secrets and the mysteries, the music, because Frances was a very fine musician. Their first visit to the park, John Jensen is singing and playing a guitar, was he, Deborah? I don't remember, but he was singing as he took them up to visit Elk Falls. And so there was a lot of music. My husband is very musical and has been involved with the Evergreen Chorale. Rex Rideout was very helpful and was certainly one of the very interesting people that I met through writing the book, and then got to know better as a volunteer. And he does a lot with music. And so music was definitely a thread. And then the intrepid nature, and I attributed, we talked about Rachel being a very brave person, which she would have to be to endure homesteading for 7 years up to claim the land. So those were really the threads. But as far as who were the strong female figures, I would say, I would throw that open to you. Who would you say are the strong female figures that you thought, that you saw?
Well,
Michelle?
I think a big piece of it that we were talking about was the fact that when people were ceding their property to somebody, it was to Rachel and not Archie. And it had been brought up that there seemed to be a common theme of him not being around as much. And I kind of put 2 and 2 together just because I know a fair amount of history from, I live down the hill, right at Wadsworth and C470. And I have a very, very good historical background of the Littleton area. And one of the clubs that you mentioned that he was part of was the Woolhurst Country Club.
Right.
Which during that time period was known for gambling, prostitution, drinking during Prohibition. And there
Oh,
was an
interesting.
underground tunnel from that building where the Woolhurst Country Club is over to what is now the Littleton Office Center. It's the regional office for Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
Yeah.
Which in that tunnel, it crosses county boundaries. So in
Is part
Arapahoe,
of that is part of that in Jeffco or not?
part of it's in Arapahoe County and parts in Douglas County,
But not in Jeffco.
but not in Jeffco.
I was thinking that's a great article for this magazine.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know.
Darn.
Yeah, but it was like, since I knew about that, I was like, well, was he gambling away the money? Were people gambling and losing to him and they lost property, but he was putting it at his wife's name so he wouldn't lose it or be incriminated in that piece? So I was going to do a little bit more research into some of those other institutions or clubs that he was a member of. But we just thought it was really interesting given the time and, you know, not horribly long after suffrage that Rachel ended up being the owner to most of those pieces of property.
That's interesting. Yeah. That's very interesting. He really did struggle financially, and but he also seemed to be very conservative, always very conservative and probably somewhat religious and from a very strong family. Rachel, everybody just loved Rachel and had so much deep respect for her. Rachel was very kind. She was very intuitive, very mystical. You know, if there's one person that I would like to meet, it would be Rachel. And I would certainly say that she was certainly a very strong woman. Frances, I don't know. I think that's a good thing for us to discuss. Did anybody else, you know, you're raising some really good questions. Anybody else want to talk about any of those things or their impression of who the strong women were in the book? Deborah, did you want to jump in there?
Well, we were talking about strong people in the area and maybe not so much in the book, I think.
Mhm.
We all knew, I mentioned Josepha Williams, who founded Highwan Homestead and was a female doctor and, you know, a contemporary of Archie and Rachel. And, you know, it just seems like they're in this period of time, there are very strong women. And I'm not sure that we talked, oh, I know, Carol thought that Bob's aunt certainly was a strong woman.
Oh, okay, Artie, okay.
Mhm.
We need to do an article on Artie. I think we need to have Bob write an article on Artie.
Yes, yes, I think she's a very interesting person.
I think so too, yeah. This is Artie Phelps, who was the bookkeeper for Elmer Berg. And, so she kept track of all of the comings and goings on the Elk Falls Ranch. Candace, what was
Certainly
impression?
Birdie was a strong woman.
Birdie was a strong woman.
Was so well known for having her bird ambulance, and you know, lots and lots of people knew her. And what did she live to be, 99 or something, you said?
She was 2 months from 100, and I
Yeah.
met her when she was 99 and a half.
Right. So I mean, you know, she was a strong woman, and then one that didn't get married.
Right. Yeah. And a close friend of Frances's.
Right.
Yeah. Younger than Frances, though. Yes, Michelle?
I was just noticing that if we're only going until 3, that we're getting pretty close to that. And we did want to talk about, and we've got a very small consensus here now, but Bonnie, please like chime in on this. Make a decision for what our next book's going to be. And we have a list of books. I don't know if it got emailed out to everyone, but those books are Pulling Harvey Out of Her Hat, The Amazing Story of Mary Cole Chase. The second book is Doc Susie, The True Story of a Country Physician in the Colorado Rockies. The fourth one is A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains by Isabella Bird. And the last one is Following Isabella, Travels in Colorado Then and Now by Robert Root. Is anybody familiar with any of those books other than I have a fair feeling that pretty much everybody knows the first one. Just because it's about Mary Coyle Chase.
This is a book that Juliana has sent me information on. I think that this is a brand new book that this author's been researching about Mary Quayle Chase. And it's one that I would like to read. It sounds very interesting because we did a lot of research on her and
Yes.
and so on.
I was unaware that there was a new book. So that would be
Yeah, I think it's brand new.
of
Yeah.
interest. I've read Doc Susie and I read The Ladies,
And
which I
I've
liked very, very much.
Yes.
Ladies' Life, I found tedious, and it surprised me. I mean, I had to force myself to read
finish
it. I mean, I'm not exaggerating, and I mean, I hike a lot, and her hiking up Long's Peak and all that should have been very interesting to me, but I forced myself to read it. So
I would agree with you. There's so much description in that book that it kind of loses you after a while.
yeah.
I also read it because it was good for me, so I finished it. But it wasn't. I couldn't. And I agree with you. Is it Deborah or Debbie?
Deborah.
Okay, Deborah. So I agree with you, Deborah and Michelle, that it was tedious, and I really thought I was going to enjoy it. People told me what it was about, and I was like, oh, I'm going to love this because I love being outside. And she's literally a trailblazer in what she was doing. But yeah, it wasn't as exciting as I thought. And I also didn't know that Pulling Harvey Out of the Hat. I hadn't heard of that. So that sounds of those that I'm looking at, and I haven't read Doc Susie either, but Pulling Harvey Out of the Hat sounds like it would be good, or Out of Her Hat. Is that one that's available public library? Did anyone check on that? I can right now. I'm just wondering if that was something anybody did.
Would you mind doing that, Candace, and just double check?
I am doing it right this minute.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah.
It was just released in October.
Oh,
Oh,
October.
okay. Is it on Kindle or not?
It is
It is?
on Amazon. Sorry, let me back up one step.
Is it out in paperback yet?
Kindle or hardcover?
Yeah, it might be pretty limited at the library.
I'm not seeing it, but I'm going to look on Prospector and see if it comes up there.
Okay.
Yeah, there are 2 copies if you go through Prospector. So that's in the state of Colorado. There are 2 copies available
Oh
from
my.
the library. Yeah.
I wonder if we would put that one off till 6-8 months in the future when hopefully more libraries pick it up.
Yeah, let me look it up another way, because sometimes well, let me just look it up.
Yeah, I know if I look it up, it's probably by preference, like my branch preference.
Well, sometimes it'll be under different formats. It'll come up more easily, but it doesn't come up under Mimi Pitbross either. So I suspect it is just the 2 copies.
Okay.
And I'll look up Doc Susie also.
About Following Isabella. Nobody said anything. I haven't read it.
I don't know anything about that either. Let me see if I can find anything on that.
would-
Duck Susie is more readily available on Prospector. I'm seeing 10, 11, actually 33 copies, 14. Yeah, there are a lot of copies of Duck Susie if we wanted to go that route in the state.
Here's the write-up on following Isabella. It says a world traveler, Isabella Bird, recorded her 1873 visit to Colorado Territory in her classic travel narrative, A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains. This work inspired Robert Root's own discovery of Colorado's Front Range following his move from the flatlands of Michigan. Oh, goodness. Yeah, and then it doesn't really want to give you more. It wants to go to a different page. Yeah, so
If you
this,
look in the chat, I've put in the book description for you.
oh, Lynn, aren't you smart?
The secret person behind the curtain. I'm Googling over here.
So who is the secret person behind the curtain?
It's Lynn Rudy.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Oh, there she is.
All able to read that in the chat?
I can see it, yes. Thank you.
Oh, there, okay.
This book was actually, it was recommended to us by Rex Rideout as well. It was one that he really liked. So if you're in any of the same circles of Rex for book groups.
Well, and then I wonder how new this one is. Oh, that one's October of 2020 as well. So that might
Oh, it's actually 2009.
Oh, is it?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Now I see that. I was following the chat up and that was the other book. So I wonder how readily available that one is. Candace,
for
do you have the
Pretty
library?
available on Amazon. They have used books for about $4.
Okay. Okay, so what I'm kind of getting from this is that we'll be voting between Doc, Susie, and following Isabella. Is that agreed? We'll wait a little while on pulling Harvey out of the hat until it's more available.
It really depends on what the group wants to do, because I know some people really want to they're fine purchasing the book. Other people want to get it from a library. So I don't know what other people's opinions are, and we don't have the whole group here. So I'm wondering if it might be a good idea just to say, here are the books, here is the availability, and does anybody have any preferences? Because Duck Susie is readily available through Prospector, which I find very easy to use, but I don't know how easy that is for other people. And if people are the preference is Kindle, then that would obviously open up another question.
I would imagine that's available on Kindle. I actually have like half a dozen copies of the book, but have loaned them out, and I think I only have one left.
Yeah, I prefer the library or the prospector. I'm not into buying anything more.
Okay, well, why don't we do this then? Why don't we'll shoot out an email and let everybody do a vote based on their comfort and availability and do options 1, 2, and 3. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, Susan, were you going to say something?
I think we do want to go ahead and pick the next date, though. Based on the folks who were able to make it today, we would certainly want to make sure you could make it to the next one.
Yeah, my date thing isn't a problem.